I noticed an issue with her that literally could have caused her end. Dangerous. But I had a primitive solution. When I got back from the recent Pistons and Paws show with Esther, my ST170 powered Mk1 Escort, I noticed an issue with her that literally could have caused her end if I didn't notice it. When I put this thing away after Pistons and Paws, I noticed a load of fuel all over Esther's fuel rail. In fact, there's a little bit on there, not sure if that's going to come across on camera. It turns out that this fuel rail has actually got a crack in it around here. A fuel leak is obviously very bad news. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and today I want to solve this fuel leak on Esther as well as tackling a couple of other things that I keep not getting round to. Now obviously any fuel leak can be a potential fire hazard, and if you think about it, where that leak is just above the alternator, which is obviously an electrical component. So potentially I'm quite lucky that this thing didn't go up in flames when we were on the way back from Pistons and Paws, even though we were taking it really easy. Anyway, if I flick the electrics on for a sec, so there you go, you can just see it sort of making little waves along the fuel rail. So there you go, it is only a very slight leak, but it's still a fuel leak at the end of the day, which is always potentially very dangerous. So over here I've got a brand new Gen V fuel rail. This is exactly the same fuel rail that's already fitted to Esther, and these are available on my website at marcushayesuk.com and from my friends at BURTON Power, and I'll leave both of those links in the description of this video. Now another thing that I've mentioned on the channel a couple of times is that it seems like there could be an air leak on this thing, either in between the inlet manifold and the block, so the inlet manifold gasket, or maybe something to do with one of the seals in the throttle bodies. It's a bit weird because when I've done the test, you know, spraying some carb cleaner about when the engine's running, I get mixed results. You know, the first time I did it, I definitely noticed the revs drop a bit when I sprayed the carb cleaner around the top of the inlet manifold gasket there, and also when I sprayed it around, you know, the end of the throttle body here. So, you know, it made me think that, yeah, maybe the inlet manifold gasket is slightly leaking air and potentially a seal or something in the end of the throttle bodies. I'm guessing where the shaft goes through, around here, there'll be some sort of seal, you know, very similar to what you get on carburetors. But when I did that test again, I didn't seem to get any change in the revs when I was spraying stuff about. So I don't know if maybe this problem only occurs when the engine's super hot, but I've definitely noticed recently that I'm having a bit of an idle issue that I've mentioned very recently on the channel, where, you know, it will just start idling at about 800 RPMs rather than 1000 RPMs. Another thing that could be causing my idle issues is the injectors. These injectors were fully refurbed when I put this ST170 setup in by a company called Bell's Auto Services, and I'll leave their links in the description as well. But they actually refurbed 2 sets of injectors for me when they did that. So I'm thinking, whilst I've got this apart in this video, I'm going to switch the injectors out as well, because maybe one of the injectors is starting to fail. So yeah, need to sort out the fuel rail. I'm going to also change the inlet manifold gasket because I've got one of those, and I'm going to switch out the injectors. But when I take this apart, I'm going to do it in sections. So, you know, I'm going to take the throttle bodies off of the inlet manifold and then take the inlet manifold off of the engine, and then that way I'll be able to maybe inspect any seals that are in the end of the throttle bodies. So basically at this stage I've just got a load of dismantling to do, so let's cue some music and crack on with it. First things first, to empty the fuel rail of fuel, I ran the engine without the fuel pump turned on until it died and then wouldn't restart. With the battery disconnected, it was time to start dismantling everything. First, I disconnected the fuel pipes from each end of the fuel rail, and then I moved the strut brace out of my way. I disconnected the HT leads from the coil and moved those out of the way. Then I disconnected the rocker cover breather and unplugged the cam sensor and the injectors. I removed the air inlet temperature sensor and the injector retaining clips before unbolting the fuel rail, being careful not to lose the little spacers. Then I could just pull the fuel rail off the injectors to remove it. I counted the threads on the throttle cable so that I could set the tension the same later on, and then I set about disconnecting the throttle cable from the linkage, which is attached to the inlet manifold by the top two front throttle body bolts. I worked out that I could leave the linkage attached to the back throttle body as long as I removed that throttle body first. I just needed to slacken off the throttle body balance nut and bolt first. So that's what I did. Off came the linkage and the back throttle body, followed by the front throttle body, once I'd unplugged the throttle position sensor of course. Then I unplugged the coil pack before removing the inlet manifold, which needed a bit of a wiggle to pull it away. Alright, Esther's in bits and I've got all the bits laid out here, including the broken fuel rail. Now I was just having a look off camera about how I can get all this dismantled to see if there is any seals in there that might be causing my potential air leak. If we look, I mean this end it's still got the throttle position sensor on there, so if we look at the other one, still obviously got the throttle linkage attached to, but yeah, the other end of this, which will be the same under there, it doesn't look like there's a seal, maybe a sort of bush, like a metal sleeve sort of thing, keeping that sealed. So yeah, I would assume that if there was a seal, there would be one at both ends, so potentially beneath this and this of course it will look something like this, and yeah, all I can really see is that that might be sort of a metal sleeve, you know, rather than a seal. So if that's the case, then that's going to need to be sort of pressed in, you know, pressed out and then a new one pressed in. But to be honest, when I'm looking at this, I can't even figure out how it comes apart anyway. There is a little grub screw in there, but I don't have the correct size Allen key for that. And it's weird because a 2mm Allen key is too big, but a 1.5mm Allen key just slips. So is there any such thing as a 1.75mm Allen key? I don't know. But yeah, all of that is making me sort of anxious whether I should even try and dismantle this. Seeing as, you know, the tests I did, you know, one of the times it seemed like spraying it around this area caused the revs to drop, and then another time it didn't. It could just be that when I was spraying the carb cleaner, some of it was going into the trumpets and causing the revs to drop. I don't know. So yeah, I think I'm gonna sort of not bother dismantling this. And if after changing, you know, the injectors and the inlet manifold gasket, I'm still getting the air leak symptoms, then maybe I'll revisit that. But I think I'll need to get in touch with Gemv first before I start diving in, dismantling things that I don't understand. Now, my other set of injectors and the inlet manifold gasket are actually in my beautiful girlfriend Kat's boot, and she's gone to the gym, so she's going to pass through here soon with those parts. But to be honest, I'm not 100% sure if I'm actually going to be able to put this thing back together today. Let me explain. First of all, although I have removed all the remaining bits of gasket from this face off camera, I need to give that face a light sand to remove all traces of the old gasket, and I don't have any sandpaper here in this garage. I'm pretty sure I've got some at home, so that isn't necessarily going to stop me putting this thing back together. But with regards to this fuel rail, now as you can see, it's in 3 pieces. You know, we've got the pieces in here, which basically consists of these 2 pieces, which have got, you know, the fittings on the end, and this pipe in the middle. But that pipe comes oversized because essentially, depending on what a car or what engine you've got your Gemvs attached to, will determine how long this piece of pipe needs to be. And basically, you need to cut the pipe down to the exact length that you need, but you also need to chamfer the ends at between 15 and 20 degrees for 1 millimetre. And when I'd done this before years ago, I actually gave that pipe to my friend Carlo at AR Valley Precision Engineers and got him to basically machine it so that it's exactly in spec. And then I was able to push the pieces together. I'll just show you what these bits look like. So in there, it's been machined out, and I'm guessing that the seat where the pipe sits against is between 15 and 20 degrees, and there's a little sort of circlip in there as well to hold it all tight. Now obviously, if you don't get this right, it can cause leaks, and with it being an injection setup, the fuel pressure is really high, compared to a carb setup. So yeah, you really do need it to be pressure tight, right? So the lazy cowboy amateur in me is telling me that I should try and remove this pipe from the old fuel rail and try and reuse it in the new fuel rail. In fact, I'm kind of thinking that I should just replace this bit for the new bit. I'm actually thinking as well that maybe I could give this to my friend Lee Booth afterwards and get him to sort of V out that crack and TIG weld it, so then I've got a spare for if this ever happens again. So yeah, basically, if I can't get this apart without destroying this pipe and then ultimately reuse this pipe, then I'm definitely not going to be able to put this thing back together, because I'm going to have to give the new bit of pipe to someone who's got a lathe so that we can get it cut to length and get it chamfered accurately. So I suppose it's time for me to see if I can get the old fuel rail apart without destroying that pipe. I was unable to pull the pieces of the fuel rail apart by hand, so I grabbed the Kent Europe 9-in-1 lubricant and penetrant and sprayed where the pipe meets the two halves of the fuel rail. I then wrapped a bit of tissue around the pipe to protect it, and then clamped on the mole grips, and with a spanner on the cracked bit of the fuel rail, I tried to get the pieces to twist, but the mole grips just kept slipping. I used trial and error to keep adding tension to the mole grips until I could get the bits to spin, and then I was able to pull the fuel rail off of the pipe. Alright, so success. Managed to get this off. Have damaged this pipe a little bit, but the mole grips are only done up as tight as they needed to be. So yeah, that was inevitable, but this is only a temporary measure. Reusing this just to get the car back together. My beautiful girlfriend has delivered my other bits, so we've got a brand new inlet manifold gasket, and we've got my other set of refurbed injectors. As you can see, when Bell's Auto Services do the injector refurb, they literally give you a printout showing how good or bad the injectors were before the cleaning, and then they test them again after they're cleaned out to sort of prove that they're working within spec. They're flowing the amount of fuel that they should be. So yeah, really decent service, gives you a real peace of mind that your injectors are sweet. So yeah, now we can throw these brand new, essentially, refurbed injectors into Esther's throttle bodies. Kat also brought me around some sandpaper so that I can clean up that gasket face, and she brought around my very primitive synchronization tool so that when we put all this back together, we can make sure that the throttle bodies are even and it's all tuned up and ready to go. So essentially all I need to do now is give all these bits a bit of a clean. Definitely need to make sure that this face is clean and these faces. There are O-rings that seal the throttle bodies against the inlet manifold, and they look absolutely fine, so I'm going to reuse them. But yeah, I'm going to clean all these bits up, clean up the gasket face, and then we'll just throw Esther back together. After giving the throttle bodies a bit of a clean, I used the flat surface of one of my toe plates and some sandpaper to clean up the faces on the inlet manifold. I then sanded the cylinder head face before chucking on the new gasket, and then the inlet manifold went on with a bit of help from my persuader. Once the manifold was bolted on, including bolting the coil pack to it, it was time to get the throttle bodies refitted, which use O-rings to seal against the inlet manifold. Unfortunately, the O-rings kept falling out of their grooves whenever I tried to fit the throttle body because the mounting face is at an angle. But I had a primitive solution. A bit of saliva held the O-rings in place, and enabled me to get the throttle bodies bolted back on, in the reverse order to what I removed them in, starting with the front one and then the rear one, along with the throttle linkage. Once that was all bolted up, I hooked up the HT leads and the throttle cable, removed the old injectors, and it was time to fit the new ones, which were individually bagged by Bell's Auto Services to keep them nice and clean. I used some engine oil to lube up the O-rings before pressing the new injectors into the throttle bodies. And then it was time for the fuel rail. I sanded the pipe to make it nice and smooth, then lubed it up before pushing it into the new piece of fuel rail, and there it was, ready to fit. I did lube up the other O-rings on the injectors before carefully pushing the fuel rail onto the top of the injectors. Then it was just a case of bolting the fuel rail to the throttle bodies with the little spacers. Then I hooked the fuel lines back up, connected the battery, and turned the key to test for leaks. And thankfully, it was all dry. There was then only a few bits left to do, like plugging the injectors back in, refitting and plugging in the inlet air temperature sensor, hooking up the rocker cover breather, plugging in the cam sensor, and refitting the injector retaining clips. Once that was all done, it was time to fire Esther's engine back up, and she fired straight back into life. Alright, so the engine is now fully back together. I've pulled Esther out of the garage because it's going to start getting dark soon, and my beautiful girlfriend has come around to help me with the filming. Now there's a couple of things I need to check before I can put this thing on the road. One is the balance between the throttle bodies. When I needed to take this apart, I needed to back off the screw there that controls the adjustment, just so that I could, get the throttle bodies separated from each other. So that nut you can see there is actually a lock nut. Inside there is a very tiny Allen key bolt, and that's what controls the balance between the throttle bodies, and then this you just do up afterwards to lock it. But essentially these two plates here, one is for one throttle body and one's for the other, so you're basically controlling how much the spindle on the throttle body, or each throttle body, is turned at rest. So that screw inside there is going to control the difference between the spindle. So you're basically trying to get it so that the flaps inside here are the same amount open at idle, which is a very, very slight amount between this throttle body and this throttle body. Now, I backed that screw out one turn, and I haven't screwed it back in one turn. So in theory, I just need to nip that screw one turn and they will be balanced. But I'm going to use my synchronization tool to, get it as bang on as I can. So essentially this tool is just a tube. This goes into the trumpet like that, and it basically measures how much the trumpet is sucking, or how much the throttle body is sucking. And then there's this sort of gauge at the other end, and there's a white thing in there that basically will lift up depending on how much the throttle body's sucking. And basically you want to just test number 1 versus number 4, because obviously 3 and 4 are going to be the same, and 1 and 2 are going to be the same, and 1 and 4 is easier for me to get this tool in. And you want to basically adjust that bolt there until these read the same on this very primitive tool. So you can probably hear that it's running really rough, and that's because the throttle bodies are out of balance. It's worth noting that I've set the throttle cable to where it was before I counted the threads when I took it apart. Right, so you can see that is roughly on 1.5, and if I put it in 4, you can see that it's bouncing sort of all the way up past 3. So I know that the screw needs to go clockwise because I had undone it anti-clockwise earlier on. So if I wind this bolt inwards, so 1.25-ish, and that's 1.5, so it's getting close. 1.5. So they're both now at about 1.5 on this gauge. So, you know, the throttle bodies are now at least somewhat balanced. This is a very primitive tool, and you can already hear that it's running a lot smoother. So that will do. Right, so now I just need to lock off that nut, but I'm going to hold the Allen key on the screw inside, just so that the screw inside doesn't turn as I lock that off. Alright, so I've just been playing with this a little bit more. Let's turn that off so you can actually hear me. But yeah, because this trumpet here is the one that got bent up, and you know, I've just tried to sort of bend it straight again, the tool wasn't sealing as well on here as it is on this one, because this one isn't bent up. So I basically just fiddled about with it again, but testing this one against this one, and yeah, it seems to be purring way better now. But yeah, this tool isn't the best. It is very primitive, but I wanted to at least show you how it works. Now, one other thing I want to do before I consider this thing ready for the road is just check the calibration of the throttle position sensor. As I already mentioned, I've wound this in to where it was when I took it apart. Basically, I counted the threads, so we've got 9 threads here. Haven't fully locked this nut off tight yet, but whenever I take the cable off, I like to recalibrate the throttle position sensor. It's really simple to do. With Kat's laptop plugged in to my ME221 ECU. These are available on my website, by the way, as well as a load of other ECUs, although this is the old ME221. The ones on my website are the new ones. Got the electrics flicked on, of course, and it's recognised that it's plugged into an ECU, so we'll select that, ME221, and we are connecting. One thing I will check is that I'm able to get full throttle first, like physically. If you push the throttle pedal all the way to the floor, and we should be able to hear it bottom out here. Go on, off, on, yeah. You can hear it bottoming out there, so that's full throttle, and we are now connected, as I say. Literally just go up to, is it ECU? ECU, down to throttle calibration, and it'll ask you to close the throttle, so just have your foot off, which we already have, and click next. Then it tells you to open the throttle fully. You just put your foot all the way down on the accelerator, click next again, and then click finish. Done. So now, when your foot is off, you'll see there primary load 0. When your foot is all the way down, you get 100 or 99.67, near enough 100. So that's the throttle position sensor calibrated. So all that's left to do now is get this strut brace reattached to the driver's side strut top, and then it's time to take this thing for a test drive. All right, into a new day, and me and my beautiful girlfriend are taking Esther to our local shopping centre. I need some new wraps for boxing, but I digress. Gives us an opportunity to test this thing. I did just think that I either had a major air leak or the balancing was, you know, really far out, because it just seemed like every now and again the revs would go up considerably, and it seemed like it was doing it when I was braking. And sometimes when you've got an air leak, it can make the revs go up under harsh braking, because, you know, the weight of the engine moving is, you know, opening up whatever gap you've got between your gasket to allow air in. As it turns out, it was the actual pedal box moving when I'm hitting the brake, which is obviously flexing the bulkhead slightly, and it was actually tugging on the throttle cable. So I've just loosened the throttle cable off a bit, gave it a bit more slack, and now it's sweet. But yeah, it makes me realise why when people build these into rally cars, they actually double skin the bulkhead there, just so that you don't get any flex under harsh braking and stuff. But yeah, everything seems sweet so far. The engine is really warm, so hopefully the issue I've been having recently, where it just runs slightly, you know, low on the idle, you know, 800 RPMs, hopefully if that is going to occur today, you know, it will do, because the engine is super hot. But yeah, we'll see. As I say, going to go down the road, going to go and do a bit of shopping, and hopefully we'll get a chance to have a couple of blasts during this little trip, and yeah, we'll see how she feels. Interestingly, I didn't get any pops and bangs there on the decel, on the overrun, which I have been getting for ages, and I kind of just assumed it's the exhaust leaking slightly. On the joints of this exhaust, you always notice like black around the joints, so it makes, you know, for ages I've been meaning to put like exhaust sealer paste stuff on the joint, just never got around to it. But yeah, that didn't do the pop and bang, so I wonder if that was all along something to do with the throttle bodies. Bit of a shame to not have pops and bangs, isn't it?
She's growing up.
Yeah. She's too old for pops and bangs. Yeah, she's definitely not popping and banging anymore.
No.
So it probably did definitely have an air leak then, even though I was getting mixed results.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was out of balance before and it's not now. Quick check for fuel leaks while we're stopped. It's all dry. Happy days. Let's go shopping. All right, mission accomplished. Boxing wraps acquired, and now it's time for us to head home for dinner. And we'll try and take some faster roads so we can open this thing up a bit on the way. Alright, she is home and I'm calling that a successful shakedown. I definitely think that this throttle cable is now too loose, where I loosened it off to prevent the revs going up every time I hit the brake pedal. I think maybe I should tighten that back up, and then maybe there's something else I can do around here to stop that issue. Because yeah, essentially the rev should be controlled by the stop here that yeah, that this thing leans against when you come off the throttle cable. So I reckon I can tighten that up and then fiddle around with that to sort that issue out. It's actually idling slightly lower than it was before. It's on about 800, so it's kind of idling how it was when the problem seemed to occur. But I'm pretty sure that what's been going on was there was an air leak, which I've now solved, and yeah, maybe when the engine got up to temperature, that little air leak would close up, and that's why the revs went down. But yeah, now that we don't seem to be having any pops and bangs, that also makes me think that there was indeed an air leak before, which we've now solved. I do want to have another look at the balancing between the throttle bodies. I want to spend a bit of time one day, you know, off camera and just try and get that as accurate as I can. Maybe I should invest in a bit of a less primitive synchronization tool, who knows. Yeah, other than that, no fuel leaks, so that's good. I do need to get that other pipe cut down and chamfered, as I mentioned earlier in this video, and then I'll fit the other brand new half of the fuel rail, and hopefully I'll get my friend Lee Booth to TIG weld up the crack in the old one, so at least I've got a spare. But yeah, cool to have Esther back up and running. I think tomorrow I'm going to jump in Esther and head over to my other garage where I store Heidi, my Model Mark II Escort, and crack on with the next stages on her. So that will probably be the next video. So I'm going to end this video here. Massive thanks to everyone who's tuned in. As always, do click subscribe if you're new to keep up to date with all future uploads. Check the links in the description to follow me on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. I'll leave my email address down there for anyone who wants to contact me, as well as a link to my website and the Petrolhead Style website. Massive thanks to my patrons for your ongoing support. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.